If you recall, we revealed that most Seventh-day Adventists believe that the 10 toes found at the bottom of Nebuchadnezzar's image represents 10 Germanic tribes. However, you should already know that I believe that the 10 toes on Nebuchadnezzar's image represents every kingship that has ruled the world prior to the Roman Empire, who become the kings of the East at the end of the world. And in this video, you're going to find out there's so much more to Nebuchadnezzar's image than what you realize. And you're going to find that out right now. Now, when we look at Nebuchadnezzar's image, we understand that the head of gold represents the Babylonian Empire. The arms and chest of silver represents the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and thighs of brass represents the Greek Empire. And the legs and toes of iron represents the Roman Empire. We also understand that the clay found in the feet and toes represents the papacy. However, because of the common belief that the 10 toes represents 10 Germanic tribes, we often say that this image ends at the time Rome was invaded by Germanic tribes from the north. And unfortunately, this interpretation of the image causes us to see the image ending, the prophecy ending around 476 AD at the fall of the Western Roman Empire. However, this now puts us in a bind because we know that this image actually reaches to the end of the world. And we know this because Daniel 2:44 says, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." So think about this. How can we say the prophecy ends around 476 AD with the invasion of Germanic tribes from the north, when clearly the scriptures reveals that this image ends at the end of the world? Another problem that we face is that the Bible says that these 10 toes were mixed with the clay. We understand that the clay is the papacy, so this would mean that the 10 toes, or the 10 Germanic tribes as so often interpreted, would have to have been mixed with the papacy. Unfortunately, the historical record doesn't corroborate this idea. And we know this because the Huns fell off the map around 454 AD, the Uriah ended in 508 AD, the Vandals were destroyed in 533 AD, and the Burgundians were conquered in 534 AD. So how can all 10 tribes be infused with the papacy when in reality, several of them were destroyed before the papacy even came into existence? And to alleviate this conundrum, several of our fellow Seventh-day Adventists are suggesting that the papacy gained supremacy prior to 538. However, if we say the papacy was established prior to 538, then we have to look at some of the other Germanic tribes that existed prior to 538. Tribes such as the Alans, the Celts, the Greuthungi, the Sarmatians, to name a few. You see, it's hard enough alone to pinpoint the Germanic tribes that were to make up the 10 toes. It's even harder to find 10 Germanic tribes that were infused with the papacy. And the reason why it's difficult to pinpoint these 10 Germanic tribes is because when we look at the history of these Germanic tribes that invaded Rome, there were often divisions, there were often allegiances, there were often tribal takeovers. And that's why almost every scholar who holds the position that these 10 tribes were 10 Germanic tribes, almost all of them have a different list of who they say the 10 Germanic tribes are. And that's because there doesn't appear to be a time in history where Rome was divided into 10 divisions, let alone 10 divisions that were aligned with the papacy. And that's why this channel exists, ladies and gentlemen. You can't take everything that your pastor's telling you at face value. You can't take everything that I'm telling you at face value. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to have your own experience with the Lord, and you have to study the scriptures. You have to pray and you have to fast over them for God to give you the understanding that is intended from the Word of God. And that's why this channel exists, to examine everything that we teach prophetically that hasn't been revealed by inspiration. And once I began studying the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image is when I saw this image in a whole new light. And you must understand is that Nebuchadnezzar's image is just not a list of kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar's image is giving us the narrative for the end of the world. And what you may not realize is I wasn't the first one who came up with this understanding. Uriah Smith had begun to understand this early in his day. And this is why earlier versions of his Daniel and Revelation books says this: no objection really exists in the point under consideration, For all the kingdoms symbolized by the image are, in a certain sense, still in existence. Chaldea and Assyria are still the first divisions of the image. Media and Persia, the second. Macedonia, Greece, Thrace, Asia Minor, and Egypt, the third. Political life and dominion, it is true, have passed from one to the other. Till so far as the image is concerned, it is all now concentrated in the divisions of the fourth kingdom. But the others, in locations and substance, though without dominion, are still there. And together all will be dashed to pieces when the fifth kingdom is introduced. Now understand that Uriah Smith would remove this statement from his later revisions of his book. Now, I don't know why. Maybe it was internal pressure. Maybe he couldn't find any scriptural evidence to support it. Whatever the case may be, what I want you to understand is that Uriah Smith was on to something. And that something is that the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image aren't pointing us to 10 Germanic tribes of Europe. They're pointing us and they're giving us the narrative that is soon about to occur at the end of this world. And in this scenario, every previous world power is represented at the end of the world back on prophecy's stage. Now, here's what you must understand. Even though Nebuchadnezzar's image begins with the Babylonian Empire and ends with the Roman Empire, which you must understand, it is still inclusive of the Egyptian Empire and the Assyrian Empire. In essence, this image is a visualization of the 7 heads and the 10 horns. You have the head, which is the Babylonian Empire, but in a sense, the head is also inclusive of Egypt and Assyria. And the reason why I include Egypt and Assyria is because these two nations were part of the symbolism of Daniel chapter 7. Notice Medo-Persia, the world power that succeeded Babylon, is there symbolized as a bear. But instead of it having one rib in its mouth representing the remains of the Babylonian Empire, it had 3 ribs in its mouth representing not only the remains of Babylon, but included were the remains of the 2 powers that preceded it, Egypt and Assyria. Thus, we conclude that even though the image begins with Babylon, in a special sense, it is inclusive of Egypt and Assyria. Now, after the head of gold, you have the arms and chest of silver. That's Medo-Persia. Then you have the belly and thighs of bronze. That's Greece. Then you have the legs of iron. That's Rome. And finally, we come to the feet and toes of iron and clay, in which the clay represents the papacy. Now, understand this concept here. Just like at the top of the image, you have literal Babylon, which was silently accompanied by 2 other world powers. Here at the bottom of the image, you have spiritual Babylon, which is also accompanied by 2 other world powers. All 3 powers of spiritual Babylon are seen in Revelation 12 and 13, which features a dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, which is also the lamb-like beast that came out of the earth. Revelation calls these 3 powers Babylon. However, we refer to them as spiritual Babylon. And this Babylon consists of 3 powers: pagan Rome, papal Rome, and the United States of America. The iron, which began in the 2nd century BC as imperial Rome, transitioning in the 6th century to papal Rome, and after 1798 has continued as the United States of America, are the iron's 3 phases. Thus, spiritually, it consists of 3 religions: paganism, papalism, and Protestantism. And we can sort of see their 3 principles are found in the name branded on the harlot's forehead in Revelation 17:5. Babylon the Great would represent paganism. It is the religion that has always plagued God's people. And then we have the mother of harlots, Catholicism of the Dark Ages, which has introduced pagan philosophies and ideologies into our Protestant religions. And then the abominations of the earth, and that is false Protestant Christianity. And thus, when you have God's true people introducing falsehoods into their faith, it becomes an abomination of the earth. Understand that Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire, and the bulk of Medo-Persia was east of Babylon. And what you must understand is that when these kings came from the east, in order to conquer the Babylonian Empire, they dried up or diverted the Euphrates River and dried it up, and they walked on the riverbed in order to walk right into Babylon and conquer the Babylonian Empire. Well, according to Revelation 16, at the end of the world, the 10 toes are called the kings of the east. And after the spiritual Euphrates is dried up, these kings then turn against spiritual Babylon's harlot system. In essence, the 10 toes aren't telling us what happened in 476 AD. The 10 toes are telling us what happens at the end of the world. And that's why you must understand is that at the end of the world, there's going to be an alliance. a confederacy, a world order of sorts. But there's more. Verse 41 says, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay." The first question we must answer is, what is this kingdom that Daniel's talking about that's at the end of the world? And what you must see is that this kingdom at the end of Daniel chapter 2 is the same as the beast in Revelation chapter 17. You must understand that the beast of Revelation 17 represents an alliance, a confederacy, a league of nations, if you will. Now, we don't know how, we don't know who, but all we know is that at some point in the future, there's going to be a group of nations on this earth, and they're going to have some sort of an agreement. And that agreement, that coalition, that confederacy is represented by the beast that we see in Revelation chapter 17. It is also what is termed as the kingdom at the end of Daniel chapter 2. Now, the text continues by saying that this kingdom shall be divided. In other words, this alliance that is formed by this League of Nations, it will be pressured. It will be somewhat coerced. Revelation 13 puts it this way: "The United States, or the beast, shall say to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live." Now, I don't want to get into what the image of the beast is and all that at this point right now. But what I want you to understand is that the basis of this coalition is based upon the image of the beast, and that beast is the first beast in Revelation 13 that came out of the water, and that beast is papal Rome. Thus, through the United States of America, the coalition gives life back to what was formerly known as the papal Roman Empire. And the reason why it gives life to the papal Roman Empire is because the principles of the coalition is based upon principles of the papal Roman Empire. And when the United States pushes this or pressures the rest of the world to accept this coalition, this agreement, that agreement is based upon papal principles. And that's how papal Rome comes back to life again. It is through the principles that are pushed in the coalition that is pressured upon the world from the United States. Now, I don't want to get into the principles or the operations of this final world order, but now we understand why the kingdom is divided. They're divided because the principles have been pushed upon this league by the United States of America. Then the text says, "There shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with the miry clay." Now, I want you to think about what the text is telling us. What was the original iron? It was Imperial Rome. Now, we have to ask the question, what was the strength of Imperial Rome? It was military, it was economical, and it was political. Rome had the best military. That military conquered other nations. It had the best economic power. And that's because when it conquered those nations, it confiscated their wealth and enslaved their subjects. And finally, political power. Rome swallowed up Greece, Egypt, Babylon, and many other nations, making it a huge conglomerate. So when the text says that in the feet and toes were the strength of the Roman Empire, the strength of Imperial Rome, you must understand that spiritual Babylon, the world union at the end of time, will replicate that same strength. It will have the military power supplied by the United States of America. It will have the economic power supplied by Europe and the Vatican. But in order to complete the three prongs of the iron strength, it must also have the political power. And that's why it must be a conglomerate. It must be a league of nations. It must have a world impact, a global impact. And in order to do that, it must have an allegiance with many of the nations of the East. And this is where the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image comes into play. Here is where the 10 kings of the East come into the picture. And this is why Revelation 17:13 says, "These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." That beast is the world union, the world empire, the world order at the end of the world. It is then that the 10 kings are pressured into joining this alliance at the end of the world. Now, you must understand is that initially the 10 kings of the East will not want to join this alliance. This is why it's a divided alliance. But you must understand is that after a time, they will be deceived into joining this alliance. And you must understand that it is at this time that demons will begin appearing as heathen deities like Muhammad or Krishna. I have no idea. You may even see or hear about Jesus Christ appearing here and there on the earth, and we know who that is. Regarding this deception, Ellen White says, as we near the close of time, there will be greater and still greater external parade of heathen power. Heathen deities will manifest their signal power and will exhibit themselves before the cities of the world. She also says Satan also works with lying wonders, even bringing down fire from heaven in the sight of men. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that Matthew 24 reveals that there's going to be false Christ. We know that Revelation 13 says that there will be fire coming down from heaven. And what we must understand is that all of this is to bring the world under this one umbrella, Satan's last hurrah, getting the world under one order under his command. And because of this deception, the kings of the East now join this alliance. And in a way, if you can think about it from this perspective, in a way, it's almost as if the old Roman Empire is now back together again. There's Europe, there is North Africa, and the Middle East. The whole gang is now back together again. And this is why the text says the toes of the feet were part of iron. But unbeknownst to many, behind the scenes, the papacy will be pulling the strings. And this is why the text also says the toes were part of clay. However, just like natural iron is strong and clay is brittle, this world order in the last days is strong because of its military, economic, and political prowess. But it is brittle because it's held together by spiritual deception. And just as quickly as this new world order is set up, it falls. Verse 43 says, whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And you must understand is that as soon as God's judgments begin hitting this earth, this world union called Babylon begins to crumble. And the harlot system is seen for what it is, a big lie. And the kings of the East then turn against the harlot system. And thus the fulfillment of Revelation 17:16, where it says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Now, what you must understand is that Ellen White makes a small commentary about these 10 toes, but you will notice that it's vastly different from anything that I've revealed to you thus far. Notice what she says here. She says, we have come to a time when God's sacred work is represented by the feet of the image, in which the iron was mixed with miry clay. She also says the mingling of churchcraft and statecraft is represented by the iron and the clay. They have invested their strength in politics and have united with the papacy. But the time will come when God will punish those who have made void his law, and their evil work will recoil upon themselves. Now, just a little context for this. Ellen White lived in a time where there was something called a Sunday law being proposed. And so she's writing these statements with the Sunday law in mind. And now here in her statement, when she says statesman, she is referring to the government, okay, who had already been clasping hands with the papacy. All right, okay, so some of the principles of the papacy, they were sort of grasping those principles, and which is mainly, Sunday as the national day of worship. And then she talks about the churchcraft, which here she's representing, or it represents the Protestants who were mixing themselves with the government of the United States. Okay, so she's saying that with this Sunday law in mind. Now, her statement seems to almost suggest that the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image were the Protestants of the United States. And while I understand why many of you may take this stance, let's understand why Ellen White would sort of make this connection. In Manuscripts 39, 1899, she says, while representing the kingdoms of this earth, the image revealed to Nebuchadnezzar also fitly represents the deterioration of religion. This statement is extremely important in understanding why Ellen White would make the connection of placing or suggesting that the Protestants of the United States were actually the feet and toes of iron on the image. And what you must understand is that even though Ellen White understood that Nebuchadnezzar's image was based upon the kingdoms of this world, she also made a secondary application that the image of Nebuchadnezzar also represented the religions of this world. When Ellen White makes this statement, she's not referring to the image from its imperial standpoint. She's looking at the image through the lens of the deterioration of religion among men. Ellen White understood that the final world power is the United States of America. She also understood that the final component of Nebuchadnezzar's image was the 10 toes. And so here she's making the connection that the 10 toes, since it's the final component of the statue, and the United States of America, since it's the final world power, that the Protestantism of the United States must have something to do with the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image. Remember, she's looking at it not from its kingdom standpoint, but from its religious standpoint. And Ellen White is not totally wrong here, because at the end of time, America will be controlled by Protestant Christianity, and it is America that will prompt the world to join this union. And that union will also include or feature the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image. Thus, even though the 10 toes aren't organically Protestantism, we understand that in a roundabout sense, Protestantism will have a control over the 10 toes by the mere fact America is a Protestant Christian nation. And then Daniel 2 gives us the final event. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. And now we understand why the Bible says that in the days of these kings, the end shall come. And now it makes sense how the gold of Babylon, the silver of Medo-Persia, the bronze of Greece, and the iron of the Roman Empire all exist at the end of the world. And it goes back to what Uriah Smith was starting to understand, and that is that every power that was represented on this image will be present in some form at the end of time, all the way from Egypt, all the way to the United States of America. They will have a representation at prophecy's table at the end of the world. Now, why would Christ do this? It's because he comes as the final world power. He comes as the King of Kings. And when he comes, he wants all the kingdoms present to see him crowned King of the world, King of the final superpower that will reign eternally on this planet. And ladies and gentlemen, that is when that stone comes and breaks up the image. And that is God's everlasting kingdom that will rule this world unto the ceaseless ages of eternity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Adventist watchman, and now you understand who the 10 toes are, who the 10 horns are, and who the 10 kings are.